So we're flipping the script up a little bit.
I get to answer some questions today. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that intentional. I did my master's in tax at the University of Alabama, and it's kind of, they do part of it with the accounting school and part of it with the law school, and I took an international tax course. I just thought it was interesting. I liked the nuance of it. I mean, a lot of the stuff we did in school was, some at the time, it was a lot of these tax planning things with like Apple and these big companies. It was just interesting stuff, so I enjoyed it. And then really I got to choose. So I went to Price Waterhouse or PwC in Houston, and they literally asked me, which group do I want to be in? And, for some reason I liked the international piece, and I ended up choosing what was called at the time the International Assignment Services Group, IAS, which changed to like Global Mobility. But really what that was expats. So, individuals, they were working for like a big company. So I think my clients were like BP, I think it was, or some of these big US companies that would send people abroad on assignment. But yeah, honestly, I don't really know what sounded so intriguing about that. I think it was because it was less corporate tax, individual tax. It just had this other nuance to it that I liked. And so yeah, that kind of got me rolling with international tax. And then I got a little bored with just the individual stuff, the same, because in that case, it was like the same thing over and over again, same scenario. So then when I went to Grant Thornton, I did more of the corporate international tax, and yeah, so just kind of stuck with it,
So you're at PwC, and it's your first tax job in an arguably more difficult, complicated area of tax.
Yeah.
Did that ever feel weird, or was it just, but that's kind of all you knew at that point?
Yeah, it's all I really knew. And I mean, the good thing, and that's why I like, and I still tell people, it's not a bad idea if you have the opportunity to go to one of these big firms, even if it's, it's not going to be what you do forever, because they have great training situations. Like the training is good. I mean, you literally get a whole week where all you do, we went to, where did we go? I think we stayed in Houston, but we were at a hotel in Houston where we did just international tax training. And I still have the training materials, and I'll still go back and look at them from doing that, which you don't have that benefit at a smaller firm usually. So the training's really good. And yeah, you're working around smart people.
Yeah.
And I think that's been one of the hardest things, not to like jump way ahead, but being on your own in your own firm, that was really the hardest transition for me, is because you don't have these people to go pop into somebody's office and talk about an international tax issue. My wife really doesn't like talking about it.
Yeah, I can imagine. You do a lot of international tax training for other firms. What advice would you give to somebody who's been doing traditional, either individual or business tax, that wants to start understanding this whole international tax world?
Honestly, I feel like if that's your situation, if you've been doing, I'll say normal tax, but just tax for domestic companies and people, you're in a really good spot because you have the basis of what you need from a tax perspective. I think that was one thing that made it a little harder for me, is because I started out in the nuance of the international world. So I'm looking at these very niche, complicated questions when I never really learned how to do some of the basic stuff with like a company, for example, like, book tax adjustments for their tax. I had to figure out that stuff on my own, whereas I think you're in a little better spot if you have a good understanding of just how to advise and do someone's tax return. Adding in the international stuff is a little easier. But, it depends on, there's a big difference between the individual and corporate side. I do a little more individual side now than the corporate side, but yeah, it's finding, I think you need a combination of technical learning and practical application.
So
just like with anything.
Like the opportunities to actually examine all these situations.
Because that's the problem I see, and why I end up working with a lot of companies. I do some training for firms to get their staff trained on preparing certain forms and things like that. But a lot of times it's usually a smaller, mid-sized firm that they have a handful of international clients. And it's really not worth it for them to train someone for those few clients or hire someone. So I just help them with those clients. And it makes sense because if you're not doing it regularly, it's like anything else. If you're doing this thing once a year, the next year comes around, you got to relearn how to do it. So, I mean, yeah, you really have to learn it and then be applying it. Yeah, I mean, I try to put practical training information out there, you know, so for that scenario, because there's a lot of people out there, and that's how I kind of learned when I started doing things on my own, was watching YouTube videos and reading articles online, because like I have an idea of how to do stuff, but you know, there's a lot of gray area there. So that's part of the point of the podcasts and the trainings out there on YouTube, is to give my perspective on certain topics, you know, help people prepare things.
So you went from PwC into working on like corporate taxes. Had you had much exposure to that before? Like when you were doing those individual expats?
Zero. But there's actually a step in between there that I don't really talk about a whole lot, just because it muddies the water a little bit. But so I was at PwC, and I always wanted to start my own firm. I knew that from the beginning, and I was at PwC to learn so that I could try and apply those skills and start my own firm. And I pretty quickly got the opportunity to work with, basically, you know, I'm from Mobile, Alabama, and there was a guy in Fairhope, very near me, that he was a former partner at KPMG doing international tax and had his own firm in Fairhope doing just that. And he was retirement age, looking for somebody to come in and take over what he was doing. So I left PwC within a couple of years pretty quick and moved to this guy's firm, where he was doing, it was a small business. You know, with PwC, I was doing one part of a very big process. And then I moved to this guy's firm, who was very old school in the way he did things. He didn't electronically file returns. I started that for him. We did paper everything until I got there. So we did companies, partnerships, and I had to do the whole process from selling the client to delivering it to, so that's really where I learned it. Those 2 years was practical parts of running a business from unexpected, like getting paid and that sort of thing, but also doing the corporate work. And he helped me a lot learn how to do that stuff, and I learned a lot on my own. But long story short, I was still not experienced enough to take it. Like, he was probably 72 years old when I started, and he was ready for me to start taking over that process, but I just felt like I still didn't have the experience. So that's when I left and went to Grant Thornton to get more experience in the corporate tax world. So when I went to Grant Thornton, I had done more of it at that point, so it wasn't all new to me. But then I got more real training when I was there, as opposed to just like figuring it out sort of deal.
Yeah. So that must have been a pretty hard decision to turn down taking over this business. I know a lot of people would say, I'll figure it out. I'll study up at night or whatever.
I mean, it's just confidence in general. I mean, definitely liability. Like, I don't want to screw things up, you know, and get sued, because that's a real thing, especially in the international world. The penalties are so high for missing some of these forms. It's not just messing up people's tax liability, it's penalties for missing forms that can fall directly on the tax preparer, which is a problem. But to me too, it was just confidence, having confidence to have calls with clients and know that I knew what I was talking about. And I just felt like I needed to go to a big firm. You know, part of it was I would read articles of these people like at bigger firms that said a bunch of smart stuff, you know, and I was following them to learn. But it's like, man, those guys are at the top of this whole game. Like, I felt very inferior, I guess was the best way to say it. So I was like, I need to go work with these people. So like I went and worked with, I mean, honestly, at Grant Thornton, some of the smartest people I've ever worked with in their national tax office who are still there, you know, incredible people and know a lot, but it showed me that I was capable of doing it and gave me the confidence. And so once I did that, it kind of gave me the confidence to do my own thing and learn on my own. But yeah, it was just a necessary transition for me. I knew I wasn't quite ready yet with 4 years or whatever it was of experience, you know. And I knew the guy I was working with in Alabama, like he had worked a long time in international tax work before he started his firm. I knew I needed a similar experience that he had to get that. So yeah, that was kind of the decision.